I want to now turn to more of a newcomer to RTCA. We talked about that a little this morning. We have some representatives from the newly formed Drone Advisory Committee, or the DAC, and we are lucky to have as our moderator this morning a DAC member, Captain Houston Mills. He's the Director of Safety for UPS and a captain of 757 and the 767. Also, as I said, a member of the DAC. He's the vice chair of the A4A Safety Council. He, within UPS, is on their Corporate Unmanned Systems Committee and on their Lithium Battery Steering Committee. He's from Indianapolis and had a long career in the Marine Corps. And of his 3 children, one happens to be a gymnast at Auburn that I know Andy's thrilled about. So I wanted to just add that. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to you, Houston, and good luck with your panel.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. Well, listen, we're just thrilled to be here and really just have a conversation today about some pretty exciting technology and quite frankly, being a current captain in manned aviation and having been exposed to this emerging technology is pretty exciting. I think you'll hear from us, particularly after listening to the Next Gen Committee update, in terms of the progress that's going on and some of the challenges with our national airspace system and how congested it is and how all this technology is going to help us solve it. Well, guess what? There's a bunch more coming. Right now there's over 800,000 drones that have been registered, and that's as of March of 2017. That's estimated to grow to 3.5 million by 2021. And compare that to a little over 100,000 manned aircraft that are certified. And took about 100 years to get there, and in just a few months, 2 years, we've got that many drones out there. So a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities as well. Potential for $86 billion, over the next several years. So pretty excited. What I'd like to do, is introduce my colleagues on this panel and let them give a brief introduction of themselves and a little bit about their background and what they're currently doing. So, Roby, you mind starting off?
Okay, thank you, Houston. Appreciate it. Can you hear me all? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, good morning, I guess, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing on the FAA's Drone Advisory Committee with my colleagues here. So I'm the Corporate Vice President for Technology Strategy and Innovation at Lockheed Martin Corporation, and really responsible for looking at what's the future of our technology roadmaps and interfacing with all of our customers and really imagining and inventing the future. And so I've had the privilege and honor of being selected to serve on the FAA's DAC to represent, if you will, Lockheed Martin from a perspective of a large systems integrator that is a manufacturer of very large UASs as well as medium UASs, and to really worry about the overall sort of strategic context of how we will integrate sort of the larger vehicles within the national airspace system and broader context of operations. From a background perspective, a number of years ago, I was at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House and was the Assistant Director for Space and Aeronautics and was heavily involved with the next-gen capabilities there. Also authored the National Aeronautics Research and Development Policy and Plan that really encapsulated some of the challenges that we face in terms of UAS integration within the national airspace system. So from my perspective now, it's an interesting opportunity to ensure that the FAA, as it is looking at all these challenges and from a perspective of opening up it's essentially its aperture to a wide variety of operators and manufacturers across the national airspace system, it's going to be important to make sure that the regulatory environment is going to have sort of a light touch. It's going to be accepting of backward compatibility and to understand what the costs are in terms of if there are going to be mandates for various capabilities for operation. And I think one of the most important things is not only is deconfliction of the physical airspace very important, but it's also the electromagnetic spectrum. And so one of our key issues is to ensure that as we basically crowd and the congestion across the electromagnetic spectrum, we understand, from a strategic, perspective that we understand how the operators and the users of the electromagnetic spectrum are going to interface with all the other users in that broad arena. So I really appreciate this opportunity to join with my colleagues at this office.
Excellent. Thank you, Robbie. Jess?
Hi, folks. Jazz Banga, co-founder and CEO of Airspace Systems in San Francisco. We're focused on a simple question as a company. Startup, about 30 folks. Our mission is to help those who cannot help themselves. So what do we mean by that? For many, many years, we've been building drones. One could argue that we were running all of our other businesses to fund our drone habits for many, many years. And we discovered about 3 years ago, the drones themselves are going to be a very difficult system to control. And so we focused on building systems to counter drones and at the same time open the airways for the drones that are actually doing good things. And so we've based the company really on 3 questions. How do you detect things in 3-dimensional space in cluttered environments? And it's really hard to do. It turns out radar doesn't work. It turns out just optics doesn't work. So we're focused on doing that work. We've got some of the early guys from Apple and Google on the team really working on this problem, and it's early days. So working on that. A second part of it is authentication. How do you know that drone that's 500 feet above your factory is your drone? How do you know that? And so working on authentication systems, presenting some of the authentication systems to the new IFF arcs identity arcs that are being presented. And then the fun part of it is, and you're welcome to go to airspace.co to see the fun stuff, is what do you do when you want to take a drone out? And how do you do it without hurting people on the ground? So the entire, really the puzzle was stopping a drone and pulling it out of space without hurting anybody around. And so when you go to the site, you'll see what we do, and that's what we've been focused on.
Excellent. Thank you. Brendan?
Thank you. Good morning. Brendan Schulman. I'm Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs at DJI. We are, by some measure, the largest manufacturer of civilian UAS, or drones, in the world, with what some people estimate is maybe a 70% market share, both commercially and recreationally, and everything in between, including government, education, environmentalism, all that stuff. My job as VP of Policy is to work with governments around the world to try to help educate them on what the technology does, what we can do to work together to come up with reasonable regulations that both address the safety, security, and privacy concerns and others that we have all heard about, while not stifling the innovation and the beneficial applications for the technology. So the Drone Advisory Committee, which I'm honored to be a member of, is really just one part of the work that I do, but it's very much emblematic of what we try to do around the world, which is come up with solutions, identify the problems first, then come up with the solutions. It can be a combination not just of the right legislation or regulation, but also technologies. So for example, 4 years ago, we added GPS-based geofencing to our products. So if you take our drone out to right outside here, you won't be able to take off because of the fact that we're in the Washington, D.C. area. So those are some of the things that we can do and are constantly working on improving the safety of the airspace, as well as working with our colleagues across the industry and in other industries and government on finding the right answers. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Brendan. Trish?
Thank you, Houston. Hi, my name is Trish Gilbert. I serve as the Executive Vice President for the National Air Traffic Controllers Association. I've been in this position since 2009. It is an elected position, so this is my 3rd term in Washington, D.C., serving in that capacity. Prior to that, I served as an air traffic controller at Houston Air Route Traffic Control Center in Houston, Texas. And so that puts me about 28 years in the FAA. Certainly from the NATCA perspective and the air traffic controller perspective, probably not different at all from the pilot perspective, is that our goal is to ensure that we don't stifle innovation, that we embrace new users and new technologies, but we do it in a way that we integrate it safely. And so looking at the integration of UASs into the National Airspace System, we're really looking at it from 3 different avenues or paths: the hobbyists, and then the UTM, or the low activity light UASs, and then full integration in and amongst the manned and passengered vehicles that fly through the National Airspace System. So I'm very happy to be here today and part of the discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Trish. Tim?
Morning, everybody. Captain Tim Canal. I'm the president of the Airline Pilots Association International. I'm also a 27-year Delta captain. I'm still current. I still fly. Thanks, Steve, for letting me fly your airplanes. Before that, I was a Navy attack and fighter pilot for 20 years. So I've been in the cockpit my entire career. As the president, the Airline Pilots Association is the largest pilots union in the world. We're also the largest non-governmental aviation safety organization in the world. We're very proud of those facts. Our role on the DAC is, just as Trish enunciated, is eloquently put. The only other thing I might add to that is we're keen on ensuring that our assets are available to this new community that will be operating in our airspace and under our airspace in some instances. We've learned a lot since the Kitty Hawk flight in manned aviation, and there's a lot of parallels. They don't all work. They don't all map over perfectly, but a lot of them do. A lot of them do, and we think there's true value in that. So we're honored to serve on the DAC and to participate in every level.
Excellent, great. So earlier, Margaret, when she was talking to Craig, was talking a little bit about the DAC and how we came together, and there's 35 members of the DAC from across the industry, and certainly we've got a subcommittee now with 70 members and a bunch of other folks are working on the task groups. Maybe share with the audience, and this is open to anyone, what do you think about the progress of the DAC? We've all come together. We've had 3 meetings now. We just had our third, most recently a couple months ago, and a lot of good initiatives moving forward. But what would you think? As I listened early on, particularly from some of our innovators, the question was we aren't moving fast enough. And then when you hear from the traditional aviation, it's like, okay, let's slow down. We're moving too fast. So what do you guys think about the progress of the DAC? Any insights you can provide?
I'll go first. And I want to go first because I think what we did first was really important. It was the first meeting, and it's been a year, the first meeting of the DAC. And the first order of business was to get everyone to do this in the room, that safety is the #1 priority. And there was, and I'm not overstating this, 0 hesitation. Because everyone knows, even those with steep commercial interests in seeing this technology deploy, and we want to, at the Airline Pilots Association, want to see it deploy as rapidly as possible. We think it's good for the country. But everyone understands that you're going to frustrate that commercial development without safety as the #1 priority. So that alone was good progress in the first motion of the first meeting. So we were pleased with that. And it's tough. This is a huge issue. There are so many tentacles that go everywhere. I can feel the frustration in the room that we're not moving quick enough in certain areas. That will melt away within the next year. We're going to start seeing real progress, even faster.
Excellent. Yeah, Robbie?
So I think, with any large, complex group, you have this whole phase of storming, norming, and forming, as they say. And just to really, as Tim said, really the sheer complexity of this multidimensional problem at the national level is a very significant problem. And I think the first step was to make sure that the net was cast wide enough to include all the various actors and stakeholders across the national landscape. And I think the FAA and the RTCA did a great job of making sure that large systems integrators, startup companies, users, professional associations that have a lot of other interests at hand, I think have been very useful. And I think at the end of the day, you have to sort of think through any time that there's disruptive technology in any sector. I mean, we were talking a little bit about, you look from wired to wireless technology and telecommunications. You look what's happening in the space world. There's always a period of uncertainty and a tension between different communities. And that tension, that healthy creative tension, I think ultimately is going to produce a better result. So I think the issue is that you can't rush into judgment to fix something when it comes to standards and safety. On the other hand, you have to be open that if the United States is going to be a leader in this technology, we have to be flexible. Our regulatory mechanisms, we have to embrace the innovation. And so I think at this point in time, we've just got to make sure that all the stakeholders are involved and we have that common goal and vision.
Excellent, excellent. Brendan, I'll throw this towards you. Obviously, the DAC itself is, if you think about it, it's made up of 2 distinct industries. You got manned aviation and you got unmanned aviation. And being part of one of the largest unmanned manufacturers in the world, I'm sure you've got a very interesting perspective. But certainly there's a lot of learning that's going on. What's been your observation, and what can you share in terms of what are we learning from each other from these merger or these two groups come together?
Well, we're learning a lot, but it's not just manned and unmanned. There's a lot of things in between, and there's a lot of things that are actually outside of that kind of dichotomy. In fact, I think thinking about things that way is probably the thing we learned is like that is not the world, right? There are governing interests. So I don't know if all of you know, there are 3 task groups of the current DAC. There's the roles and responsibilities, effectively the interests of local and state government. Then there's access to airspace, which is about expanding Part 107 operations into new areas and what the DAC might recommend the FAA do. And then there's the funding question. How does the FAA fund the needs of the UAS industry? And all of those really, they mesh together and they cut across both manned and unmanned and governing interests and all that. So just being in the room, having a chance to get together at this point 3 times per year, which I personally think is not enough. It'd be great to do more of that. But to meet as a larger group 3 times a year and then to work on those kinds of challenging and very interesting problems and topics, I think is a great opportunity to share ideas and just to learn about each other. A lot of, from my perspective, a lot of our challenge from the unmanned industry is education. What is the technology? What can it be used for? Correcting some of the misperceptions, figuring out what the real concerns, whether they're safety or otherwise are, and what the reasonable outcome is. And I think that's the big opportunity that we have.
Excellent. You mentioned the 3 task groups that have been formed, roles and responsibilities, looking at FAA responsibility compared to state and local governments and local governments as well as what does it take to get access to the airspace, and quite frankly, who's going to pay for it all? We know that there's an aviation trust fund that is used today to pay for our infrastructure, to pay for everything that we do from an aviation perspective. And we also know that there's a lot of tasking with the FAA. Being Director of Safety at UPS, work very extensively with our Certificate Management Office, and they're very constrained with resources in terms of what they can use for oversight responsibilities and then what they can use for certification projects. Now we've got this very rapidly emerging technology that's got a lot of demands, and quite frankly, there's a lot of resources needed. So, maybe Jazz, you want to jump in and maybe talk a little bit about, any of these 3 areas, either access to airspace, to funding, or maybe the roles and responsibility. And I'll ask the whole group to maybe think about, because this is really a big area for us, because these are the initial 3 areas that the DAC is tackling to kind of lay the foundational work for where we go next. And each of these areas are very important. So let's have a little discussion about those. And Jazz, I'll kind of start off with you, if you don't mind.
When you look at the roles and responsibilities, there's a yin and yang that's going on with drones right now, and that is, I think the cities are realizing that the drones are really great for doing great things like inspections, saving money on different types of photography and things like that. But on the other side of it, they're also afraid of what I call the 3 categories of problems with drones. And they're afraid of, one is the user that doesn't know what they're doing, which I actually call the brother-in-law. That's the way I call that category. It defines it really well. And then the second category is mechanical failure, right? Somebody running into something or falling and hitting somebody in the head. And then the third is bad state actors, right? People who want to do bad things. And so I think this, on the responsibility side, the cities are trying to deal with what is a perception of drones being very dangerous or could cause a lot of issues, but at the same time, the police would like to use drones. So there's a lot of challenges there they have to deal with.
Excellent. Trish?
Sure. I want to hit on the access piece, specifically as it pertains to integration into the National Airspace System. Not the system below the system or within the system. There's the UTM, which gets most of the discussion. That's where your Googles and Amazons are going to be able to accomplish the things they need to. But those that are truly integrated into the system, and what does that look like? We still need the technology around sense and avoid or detect and avoid. And until we get that, we're going to continue to do what we're doing today, which is accommodate those that fly through our system. And when you accommodate versus truly integrate safely, then you have workload issues, you have airspace issues, you have all kinds of things that could be problematic, but certainly workable. In addition to that, I would kind of like to speak to the 3rd task group that was put together at the 2nd meeting, which was the funding one. And you mentioned it was quite interesting when they came back and reported at our last meeting. It's not just about how is this going to get funded, being that we have, uncertainty within the government around the appropriations process, but how are they going to pay into the system? Right now, money goes into the Aviation Trust Fund via ticket taxes when you purchase airline tickets, or through fuel tax when you are general aviation flying through the system. That's not the case with unmanned aircraft systems. So what does that look like that makes it transparent for the system and fair for all those that fly through the system and need to play a part to it? But I think that group, when they reported back, they certainly had a wealth of knowledge and gained a lot of insight to how it currently works, and maybe some insight to why things are being discussed at the level they're being discussed system-wide, not just as it pertains to drones and unmanned aircraft.
Excellent, excellent.
One thing I like to say, we settled out on the safety thing early in agreement so we could set that aside and start working on what was important. And I think we landed on 3 task groups, but really, if you look about what we were talking about, we wanted to make sure they had access to airspace. We wanted to make sure that this burgeoning commercial interest could go someplace and operate. So that was really the first thing we said. What's the most important thing? Well, we need to work out access to airspace. First meeting, remember we talked about that. But then you quickly get into, well, there's some things that will prohibit you from getting access to airspace, Brendan, right? We have them, and they're called local governments, right? And that's a problem. So we had this rules and rights issues we needed to work through. And then we also quickly realized it's going to be very complicated writing the rules for the FAA on this access to airspace, so we're going to have to find a money stream. So while I think of them as equal task groups, they're derivative of we need to get access to airspace. Right. We need to figure out how to get these operators into the airspace. But if we don't solve these funding and these preemption issues, we're going to not be able to get the airspace issue access. Absolutely. So while they're equal, they're all towards one goal.
Absolutely.
So you called me out, so I'll respond to that.
It's a
and
problem.
that's fine. I love panels that are interactive. I think that's the best. So let me try to interact. The local governments are not a problem, right? They have a governing interest, and some of the concerns are quite legitimate. Yes, this is aviation. All of you know that. At the same time, it's different. It's up close and personal, low altitudes, potentially very low in your backyard kinds of things. If you go back 100 years in aviation history, you'll see we dealt with some of these kinds of issues in terms of the first manned aircraft transiting through what was considered to be private airspace. How do you reconcile that? 1926 Air Commerce Act, really excellent and really interesting history there. We're kind of in the same place. And it's not necessarily a property rights issue, but it's certainly a local governance issue. How do you protect the community against whatever kinds of harms perceived and real that might exist? And I think it's a really complex question, and one that I'm so glad that we're taking on. It's hard to make progress because you really have to think through all the issues at the same time. If you're going to take one pathway, it might lead to a certain kind of outcome that could help solve problems, or you get stuck. But it's really, I think, you're absolutely right, Tim, that it's an access, and this was the first meeting, these are all access to airspace issues. So we did a survey of media reports, and we found that drones have already saved at least 59 lives in the past 2 years. So we focus on safety, 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 but the drones are actually saving people's lives already, and a third of those are consumers, recreational people who have a drone at the right place. There's a fire, there's a flood, they show up, the first responders say, let's use your drone, and they go and they save the life. So there's a safety positive case, and we see drones being used at airports around the world to help improve airliner safety. So we have to take that into consideration even as we try to address the safety, privacy, and local governing concerns. And then we have balance, and then we can move forward.
Excellent. So Janice, we're talking about access to airspace, and we talk a lot about safety, obviously, and privacy, but the security component of this from a public perception, and Administrator Huerta mentioned to all of us very earnestly from the beginning, and that is the pace of integration is going to be based on what the public accepts. And so the safety, security, privacy questions have to be addressed. So I know you're doing a lot of work, in your area from a security perspective. What are some of the things that we're thinking about in that space that will help us accelerate, moving access to airspace from your perspective?
Yeah, when you look at what the concerns of enterprise are, and we work a lot with some of the baseball stadiums that are worried that, that errant, it's happened before too, where a drone lands into one of these baseball stadiums. They're very worried about affecting, the fan safety, right? Anything that affects that. and also their businesses. And so what's happened is that they're very concerned about being able to control their airspace. And they're not worried about the 400 feet up, but they're worried about their dome around their business. And so they're a little frustrated in that they feel that a lot of their security teams don't have either the technology to be able to stop something from happening, nor do they have the permission. And so a lot of the work that we were doing around building counter systems, they were hesitant to use a lot of that technology because of the perception that, hey, you know, and the legal ramifications of using that. So people are definitely afraid of the darker side of drones. But at the same time, those same stadiums are also saying, hey, these broadcasters want to do what they call beauty shots of an actual stadium from far away, and they're willing to pay a lot of revenue for that, but they won't do that unless they can really identify the drone. And so I keep coming back to that kind of the yin and yang here, which is the problem is on one side there's a lot of benefits, and on the other side they're still afraid that it would be misused.
Excellent, excellent. So, Roby, you mentioned earlier a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum, and we're talking about access to airspace, and so that's a whole different area, and I'm sure many in this audience are very familiar with that. What are some of the challenges that are going on in that space, and what should we anticipate going forward?
So that's a great question, because when we talk about airspace deconfliction, there's also the electromagnetic spectrum, right, that we have to worry about. So I think at the national level, the NTIA is the governmental entity that is responsible for looking at the allocation of governmental frequencies and spectrum allocation from a governmental perspective. You have the FCC that has that broader mandate to look across to those elements. So those are a couple of governmental entities that are getting involved. I think the FAA has been working with them closely. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to this whole issue of what are you using the spectrum for? Are you using it to basically broadcast this beauty shot of the stadium and this wideband, high definition streaming video? Are you using it for active, sensing and avoiding? Which is, Trish, as you mentioned, a very important technology. And in fact, as a footnote to that, it was over 10 years ago when the National Aeronautics Research and Development Plan that the Bush administration put together basically highlighted this as a very important area, and not only from a civil perspective, but also the DoD, the defense community, also identified this as very important. And of course, the technologies in the sensing and communicating world have really evolved rapidly since that time. So this is one of the interesting issues is from a technology perspective is we now see lower costs, lower size, weight, and power for sensors, and these are some interesting technologies that we can actually try to basically put on. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be actively using a radar or a LiDAR, things like that, you have to worry about that aspect. And then again, the question becomes is in dense urban environments, if you have these communications going on, do you have enough bandwidth, and what parts of the spectrum are you overlapping with public safety channels? So those are some of the interesting things that you have to think about, I think, in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then ultimately, from when our largest customer works in the national security, the defense realm, right, we have to make sure that those frequencies are preserved in this kind of tug of war between the commercial side and national security considerations.
Excellent, excellent. So I think earlier Andy had introduced this concept of risk when he was speaking with the Next Gen Committee. And for those of you, I'm sure you're familiar, the FAA rolled out Part 107, the opportunity for small aircraft, unmanned systems less than 55 pounds, fly below 400 feet, less than 100 knots, access to airspace, but within visual line of sight, very controlled, no fight over people, as that early entry. Trish, obviously with what you do from an air traffic control perspective, the FAA very early on told us there's a plan, there's a ConOps that talks about full integration at some point. There's a progress for how that's going to take place. Maybe explain to us from your perspective, what does integration really look like? And quite frankly, what does integration mean?
So, I mean, it's not one thing. It's really three different ways into the airspace, or the air above our heads. It's not naturally into the national airspace system. So you have the hobbyists, which is probably the most problematic. Not normally bad actors, but maybe uneducated. And those are the ones where we get the negative reports with the safety concerns, flying too close to airports and aircraft. So it's an education piece for the hobbyists and how do you deal with the 101s, the Part 101. The Part 107 is, to me, the most interesting part because it really is developing an air traffic control system or an unmanned traffic management system underneath the air traffic control system, where controllers wouldn't be separating those aircraft, technology would be separating those aircraft. And those are the ones that you just described, under 55 pounds, and as we move towards something that goes beyond visual line of sight. The real concern for the controller perspective, while that is of concern because it can get close to airports and airplanes that are coming in to land or departing, is the true integration into the system. And again, with the technology not there yet, with the sense and avoid, what does that look like? We're accommodating now, whether it's a chase plane, whether it's cordoned off airspace, but we believe at some point that will be part of our world, and it needs to be part of what we're looking to do. And at that point, we will be separating them from other planes. So the question for us is, have we looked at the system in a way that integrates them safely? Lost link procedures, we need predictability around that. Are there equipage issues? Is there congestion issues? All of those things really key to us. And so we are really very, very happy to be involved on the Drone Advisory Committee and the task groups, and certainly all of the activity that's taking place at the FAA.
And do you see a natural link between the efforts eventually with in this area with unmanned systems and, you know, quite frankly, where the Next Gen Committee is going? Because obviously they're building an infrastructure there as well. How do those two eventually interlink, or do they?
I think they have to. I think at some point they're going to have to overlap. I mean, you have a lot of the same players on both the DAC and the NAC, which is a good thing. If you don't have the same exact players, you have maybe some of the same entity, the same organizations overlapping, which is important because really the NAC is not just about the manned use of the airspace. It's about all new technologies. I think as you brought up the spectrum, the use of spectrum, there's got to be some effort at some point, not just in the FAA, but across government and anybody else that wants to use that, on what the priorities should be. So I think there's more overlapping and even more important to have collaboration with regard to all of this stuff than just what we're seeing today.
Excellent. So Tim, I'll direct this to you. You and I both have the privilege of flying as captains in the National Airspace System today, and we hear a lot from our pilots in terms of this emerging technology. What do you think are some of the challenges facing, you know, pilots today, and what do you think we need to be thinking about moving forward in the future?
So I think it's centered about the safety issue. It's anecdotally, our reports that we get from our 57,000 members are tracking almost parallel to the deployment of drones into the public domain, whether they're homemade kits or something from a large manufacturer. You know, in the last year, we've seen our reports go up about 50% on sightings, but that didn't surprise us. We have some concerns over the, you know, the lack of good, solid studies that are underway but not complete yet on collision impact studies. What would be the result of a 12-pound, 4-pound, 50-pound drone impacting various parts of the aircraft? The unfortunate thing is most of these impacts, if they were to happen, would happen in critical phases of flight, which are defined as, you know, low altitude, either after takeoff or on approach. And it's not to scare anybody, but it would be a real problem. I mean, these are not birds. These are going to cause real problems for the airplane. The commercial airliners that our cargo pilots and our passenger pilots fly are very heavy and redundant systems, so we're confident we can survive things. It's when it happens in bad weather or something else is already going wrong that we're concerned about a problem. So that's the number one concern my members report to me, and they, you know, the communications, the ability to communicate with NATCA's, with Trish's members is really enhanced lately. It used to be, you know, abnormality when you would say, I just saw what I think was a drone near the airplane. Now it's quickly, and the reporting goes in, because the people we're worried about are not the commercial operators, and they're not the club operators who have been flying their RC control aircraft for generations. As reference, we're worried about the non-conforming operator. Okay, the non-conforming operator, those who are either ignorant to the issue or, God forbid, have a malicious intent. But either way, they find themselves where they shouldn't be. We think that's a relatively small group, but it's also the group that's going to grind us to a halt on all these other things we want to do if we run into one of them.
Yeah. So, and just to follow up to that, Tim, obviously there's a lot of existing programs that have allowed, commercial aviation to achieve the best levels of safety in the world.
Yep.
Now, what type of lessons can be transferred from things that we learn commercially today into this emerging technology?
So there's a lot. They don't all, like I mentioned earlier, they don't all map perfectly, but if you look at the success of the commercial aviation safety team, CAST, and what we're doing with the unmanned safety teams and the general aviation joint safety teams, those are all great examples that you don't have to wait to do that, just start doing it. Mm-hmm. Another example would be we worked very hard in the manned aviation to develop just culture programs. An example would be the Aviation Safety Action Program, where you can enter into a reporting system without fear of punitive action from the regulator or your employer. And we garner a ton of information from that schools us on how to train better, how to build aircraft better, how to run a checklist better, all that. And that's that just culture, that tri-party agreement where the regulator, the operator, and the owner are all working together to better the system in a just culture environment. That's great. And we've learned a lot about things like as simple as how to run a checklist, right? We change it all the time, but these are things that I, as a pilot at command of my aircraft, have the benefit of 50 years of aviation. The pilot in command of that UAS shouldn't ignore it. There's checklist things that they could learn on how to do it better. So we'll never stop learning, and they have a great advantage because they don't have to start at ground zero.
Excellent.
We're here to help.
Excellent. So I'm going to flip this next one over. I asked Jazz and Brenda maybe to chime in. So if you had your choice to, you had Michael Werta here, ask him a question, and you say, hey, what would you recommend that he directed DAC to look at? Now, what else should we be looking at? If you were to talk to the administrator and ask them for some guidance, what would you suggest that we also look at? Jazz, you mind?
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things we have to look at is education that is easy to distribute. If you think about the all-encompassing brother-in-law I was talking about earlier, how do you teach them? And look, I'm an RC hobbyist for many, many years. I think earlier, we know we've crashed enough small planes and burned through enough of that stuff over the years to learn hard lessons. Yep. But the people who, and you've made it so easy for us to be able to just pull something out of a box and fly it, how do you give them something that trains them? So I think one of the things I've asked, and Margaret, we talked about this too before, was some sort of, whether it's mobile education, videos, something that's cool enough and useful enough that people use it to be a better pilot, but at the same time it's educating them. So I think education's a big thing from a safety perspective.
Excellent, excellent. Brennan?
Yeah, I think I'd ask for a renewed focus on let's figure out what the lowest risk, safest operations are and make those the ones that are easy to comply with. So I agree with Tim, like we want people to understand the rules and then comply and not sort of feel like they're outside the system. And to a certain extent, the way things are today, people are incentivized to be outside the system. So there's an airport notification rule, but the FAA has refused to distinguish one airport, an unused helipad at a corporate office that shut down years ago, from the biggest airport in the country. We need those distinctions to be made because then you have compliance. Right now there's an FAA, and I love that FAA is being proactive on technology and innovation. There's an app called Before You Fly. When you open it up, let's say you're in Los Angeles, you will see 35 heliports that you're all supposed to notify. It's crazy. So a focus on what actually leads to compliance. Part of that, I agree with Jazz, is an education initiative, which we have seen, the Know Before You Fly campaign, which we're a part of, is great. But I think there are just a few things that they can do, including the creation of what I call micro UAS classification. And this is for the commercial operators. In Australia, there's a 2-kilogram category where you can operate with minimal regulation and go out and do your do your operation safely and you know what the simple rules are. And that's really important because otherwise you get this mythology of, who's causing the safety problems? Well, we know traditionally someone who's operating for money is going to be incentivized to break the rules. And this myth that I've now heard twice on this panel, that it's the hobbyists that are causing the problem, like maybe, but just remember, like every other industry, including manned aviation, you regulate the commercial operators more strictly. Why? Because at some point they're going to cut corners. And we've seen that with the Section 333 process. A lot of people didn't bother getting those. Part 107, the controlled airspace approvals take a long time. I have reason to believe people are just going out and flying in controlled airspace because they literally have a job that's going to disappear if they wait 3 weeks, so they go out and they do it. So this notion that the purpose of your operation is going to drive whether or not you're safe, I think is a bit of a myth. So to address that, make the rules reasonable and sensible, and then people, I think, will come to them.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. So, Robbie, we were talking before that obviously the Drone Advisory Committee has a multi-dimensional membership, but there obviously is a very small drone focus, if you will, just to get immediate access because we've got that space that we can play in that's not as regulated. But we also have larger members, and we know that in the future there's going to be a plan to transition into these larger manned aircraft or unmanned aircraft into the system. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that space. What's happening in that arena?
Right. So Houston, you put your finger on one of our key interests because at the end of the day, we're trying to keep our eye on the ball of the long-term vision for the National Airspace System, which is going to be about integration of large and small manned, unmanned aircraft, and as well as, for instance, also spacecraft that are going to transition, right? Because you have to think about the emerging commercial spacecraft industry that is sending, whether it's tourists or very rapid revisit small payloads into space that are transitioning through the National Airspace System. So from our perspective, we need to ensure that that broader next-gen perspective is being pursued, and that if you really think about it from a technology perspective, we're kind of creating this dynamic IoT, the Internet of Things in the sky, which is the ultimate vision, where everything is going to be a node in this very complex mesh network of communicating where it is and letting others know where it is, with safety as being the underlying and most important principle. But I think the other key thing is that, just to kind of step back, is with every sort of disruptive technology, there's an interesting analogy to what has happened in the cyber world. So, the whole, the invention and the development of the internet was really started from, the defense academic community, really never had safety or cybersecurity ever baked in from the beginning. It was really about researchers being able to communicate. And I think the strength of this whole process is that from the get-go, we are thinking about safety from an integrated perspective and not putting it on as a Band-Aid later on. So I think those are the two key things that we have to think about from our perspective as a large UAS manufacturer. Now, ultimately, when you look at your former background and Tim's within the Defense Department, there has to be that flexibility, the agility to operate within the National Airspace System, whether you're doing research and development at test ranges that the department actually owns and controls, or whether you're transitioning to other ranges, or if you're even employing some of these assets for natural disasters and things like that, where you actually have to be flexible within the airspace system.
Excellent. Brendan, I want to follow up on something you spoke about earlier, and that is you talked about some of the good things that drones are doing, saving lives. As we think about some of those positive things just in terms of disaster relief, obviously the opportunity perhaps to do things in rural areas where there's not as much risk. What do you think? How should we be approaching this? Obviously, we can't do it all at once. There's obviously you can't just start everywhere. Now, what's the smart approach from a risk perspective in terms of us moving forward in this space?
Well, I think it starts with barrier to entry, and the good news is in the past year, FAA has moved from, I think, an unreasonable one for all those commercial operations to one that's actually quite reasonable. The Part 107 test, a lot of people are passing it, they're obtaining the knowledge they need, and they're going out and they're innovating. And the applications are amazing. It's sort of like year one of the internet in some sense. One of the best applications I've heard about in the past year is a research institution that is flying our drones to collect whale snot. They're actually going out there and collecting the spray from the whale, bringing it back as a biological sample so they can check the health of the whale, diet, gender, pregnancy, really literally saving the whales. There's no other way to do that You can't fly a helicopter that close to a whale without hurting it or scaring it. You can't get a boat close enough. So there's one application. We want to open the door to those things. How do you do it? Reasonable barrier to entry that takes into account all the safety risks. And I think Part 107 is a great example. What we need to do is push beyond that. Night operations, right? So the 59 lives saved, I think, goes way up if you can send out the thermal cameras out there to find missing people who are lost overnight in the woods. I mean, just imagine that, and it's a safe time of day to operate because there's less manned air traffic, lights, visibility. We know what we need in terms of the operational safety. We need the rules to come in and support those operations. And then I think then it's like a much better time, not just for the industry, but for the society to have that tool being used in that way.
Absolutely. And I'll just throw this out. In UPS, we collaborated with a small startup called Zipline and the government of Rwanda and Gavi, who's the world's largest producer of organization for immunizations in the world, to set up a fully autonomous delivery network in the country of Rwanda, and that's currently functioning today. So as you get out there and you look for the potential for doing good, from a humanitarian perspective, from a health and safety perspective, all those things exist. I know, Tim, you and ALPA have done a lot of work talking to Congress. Maybe talk a little bit about some of those efforts. And you've been a great advocate, not just for manned aviation, but also in this space. So what are you guys talking about, and what do you see as some opportunities moving forward?
So I think the first priority for us is to set people straight that we're not against, just because we represent pilots in manned aviation, we're not against the expansion of the use of the unmanned systems in the airspace. We're actually for it. Of course, with all the safety caveats. But beyond being asked to testify in Congress on that issue, because they're interested in our opinions of what the problem is, and it's nonconformists, be it a hobbyist or a commercial operator, they're nonconformists. Let's be clear. That's the problem. And education is the answer to it. But we're also participating in the DAC and the DAC subcommittees. We're a member of the ID and tracking ARC that you mentioned earlier. Very important ARC. We've got to solve that problem en route to access to airspace. We've got to figure that out. So anywhere we're asked, and if we're not asked, we're a little rude. We ask to be asked. We want in. We think we have something to offer. We're going to keep doing that. We just are. We want to see this succeed. We really do, in a safe manner.
Excellent, excellent. So I do want to leave some time open for questions. We've got about 10 minutes remaining, so I'm sure there's a bunch of questions. Yes, sir. We've got a mic over here, and we'll try to tackle whatever we can. Yes, sir, he's got a mic coming.
Yeah, these things scare me to death. A 20-pound bird brought down a Viscount with an impact on the horizontal stabilizer. So it's a different deal than Sully where the engine's quit and it can still fly the airplane. Will a ACAS X sub U fit on a 20-pound UAV, I wonder? Or will it fit on one of the UAVs that flew off of my hand and autonomously returned to my hand? Will it fit on the UAV that my grandson flew beyond line of control? In other words, he lost link and it crashed. Fortunately, that was in Nigeria, not here in the U.S. Will it fit on the big drones that we're not that worried about, I don't think? Of course it'll fit on that. But if the ACAS XU fits okay on those things, that's great for the airlines, but what about general aviation? There's more of us general aviation people out there flying than there are. My glider port in Nevada is working on a letter of agreement now with the outfit that's in charge of the Stead Air Force Base UAV testing to do testing at our glider port. We're doing some very extensive demands on them to allow them to fly off of our glider port to do their testing. And the big win for me on that is at least we'll know when they operate. We won't let them operate when we're flying our gliders, only when we're not doing it, but at least we'll know it. But this whole issue is of concern further to me because I represent FAI, which is the international organization responsible for all sorts of records, airspace, Tim Carroll's airlines, my glider, anybody that flies anything at all, helicopter, all of that group. I wonder where we're going to be going with FAI down this road. We're not anybody other than a group that listens to and approves record flying and that type of thing. But this, I'm a 90-year-old guy. What the hell am I doing around worrying about this kind of stuff? Well, I got children and grandchildren that are going to be around the world too. And Tim, I'm very, very, very interested in what you and what our NATCA people. It must scare you guys to death to think about all these things flying around.
Well, I don't scare easy, all right? But we are concerned about it, and I'd leave it to the manufacturers to talk about the miniaturization. One thing I found when I sit in the DAC is, a problem comes up, and I go, wow. That's something we've dealt with before, but it's amazing how innovative these people are. They come up with solutions that I'm not that bright. I'm brave, but I'm not that bright. That's the problem right there. The two go hand in hand. But the innovation coming out of this area is fantastic. Yep. They're coming up with systems that the ACAS, however they want to miniaturize it, I have absolutely no doubt that they're going to have that totally figured out. And they're coming up with stuff that is reverse training. We talked a lot about manned aviation teaching them something. Well, we're learning things about why they're doing it that, wow, we should be thinking about that in manned aviation. I am concerned. I am not scared. I am concerned. I'm not scared.
From the air traffic controller's perspective, certainly there's a lot of concern. And it is probably one of the biggest issues that we hear about when we go to towers across the country and visit with the workforce. They are glad that we're part of the committees that are working this issue with safe integration. What we don't have is the nonconformists in that room before now. And so they were up in the sky well before these dialogues started to occur, and that's what they're seeing. That's what they're seeing come close to manned aircraft and passenger aircraft. And so that is one concern. The other concern we have, if the technology doesn't support integration or technology doesn't allow us to have a system underneath the system where they can separate themselves, there's just not enough air traffic controllers to separate the numbers that we're talking about to allow what the goals and the needs of the users to accomplish. There's just not that many eyes available to get it done. And there's not enough resources within the FAA to ensure that they can embrace what they're talking about doing as far as the UTM is concerned. So very concerned, absolutely very concerned. Air traffic controllers' number one issue is safety, no matter what, safety above all. So fighting new technologies is not a place we can effectively go and intend to succeed. We have to be part of finding solutions, and that's why we're trying to do this.
Yeah, and I would add to that, one of the things that was very clear, particularly coming from a manned aviation perspective, and that is, there's no compromise on safety. So access, how do you create recommendations to the FAA that meet or exceed current safety standards? Whether those are technical or whether they're policies, et cetera. And I think that's the beauty of bringing all of us together from different perspectives, is that we get to raise those very questions and say, what about this? And the other thing that really stuck out to me is when you got smart guys like Jazz and Roby and Brendan and others, and us too from the traditional. They said, hey, you guys tell us what the problem is, we'll go solve for it. And that's exciting to me. Certainly the concerns are there, but very optimistic knowing that we've got a lot of really bright people that can solve for some of these very complex challenges. So, another question.
On that note.
Yeah, hello. Just a quick question here for curiosity. I've been watching some of the hobbyists fly beautiful model aircraft, remote control aircraft with multiple engines and helicopters. When does it transition from a remote control aircraft to a drone?
I'll answer that for you. This is a question we get asked quite a bit, actually, about, especially in light of some of these rules that have turned in the last couple of weeks. The core difference between an RC aircraft and a drone is that it can fly by itself. That's an RC aircraft. You turn off your remote on your Futaba, it's going down, right? But in the case of, so you look at a DJI drone, once you set a home coordinate, you can fly the drone up, and if the remote control battery run out or something happens to it, it can fly by itself. So that's how you separate the two.
So I would take a little bit of a different view. In terms of the statute, the model aircraft goes to the intent of your operation if it's recreational. I think when you try to draw technology lines, it becomes artificial. What if that traditional model aircraft has a camera on board? If you let go, you're still going to crash, but you've got camera piloting capabilities. Is it then a drone? The terminology question is not necessarily the most informative as to what the policy outcomes should be. It's more about what is the risk posed by a particular vehicle or aircraft, and then what are the reasonable ways to regulate it. If I could just go back briefly to the prior question, because I think there was a technology question there. We are definitely miniaturizing everything at a rapid pace. So our newest drone is 300 grams, and it has high definition video, all that. So we are definitely interested in pushing the limit on the technology, and we've got our M200 drone has ADS-B in. So one question to this community might be, if we put the receivers in the drones for ADS-B to inform the pilot that there's traffic approaching, would all of you put the transmission on ADS-B out so that we can see you coming from a distance? That's one potential collaborative solution that we might work on. We also have things like vision-based collision avoidance. So we are definitely innovating on the technology safety front. But part of the gap, and I alluded to this before, is there's no advantage under the rules today in flying a lighter weight system. So inherently, a 2-pound or a 300-gram drone is going to be safer in a collision scenario. We just know that inherently. But right now, the rules are the same from a toy in my hand to 55 pounds, and I think that needs to change. Also, we need to see the results of the research. So the FAA's Center of Excellence, the Assure consortium, is working on that, on the research for that collision scenario. That will probably be due out sometime later this year. They already issued a report on ground collisions. What happens when a drone hits someone on the head? And the good news there is that it's far less serious than anyone expected. There was like a 0.03% chance of a head injury compared to a block of wood of the same weight, which was like a 70% chance of a head injury. So we really need that data to drive not just the technology. Where do we put our resources? Is it ADS-B in? Is it something else? Is it just focus on getting everything lightweight because that's inherently safe? And for that, we need the data and also a policy environment where the risks are going to be addressed in a way that makes sense.
Okay, so we've got about 45 seconds. And I'm a UPS, so we're on time. Just plug. Shameless, I know, Tim. But before we go, I just want to go through the panel. Tim, any closing thoughts before we close out?
So while we've all emphasized the safety thing, and it really isn't something that we're going to turn our heads on, but look at aviation, whether manned or unmanned, is you have to take risks, okay? The safest way to operate an airline is don't fly, okay? Just don't fly. So we are going to have to accept some risks to move forward here, just like we did in manned aviation. Where the hard work is being done by the DAC is to find out where that acceptable level of risk is. And we look forward to that.
Great. Trish?
Yeah, the piece we barely touched on, which is kind of an interesting thing, and it goes across to all kinds of conversations, which is regulation. I think we have to find that balance with regulation. Regulation can actually probably help this industry integrate quicker. However, you don't want too much regulation that it stifles the innovation. So that's of concern. I think the PR piece for what drones can do, clearly maybe that's something to look at. If we can save the whales, could drones get us world peace? So save the whales.
Brendan.
I'm going to suggest that the safest way to fly a drone is to fly it, right? We've already seen direct life-saving operations, dozens of them, plus people on the job climbing towers using a drone. You'll never be able to count that, but people are not going to fall off the tower. So that's lives and safety there as well. So we have to figure out how to get the drones to be used, because that's where we're actually seeing a net safety positive impact. And that depends on collaboration. So if all of you are interested in these issues, we have plenty of opportunities on the DAC for people to get involved and contribute. And that's really what it's about.
Excellent. Thank you. Jess?
Look, the great thing about the DAC is you have the full spectrum there. You have everybody from startups to government, all the way to the large industry players. So everybody's in the same room. We're having dinner together. We're having, a lot of the work that's done at the bar together, right? And we're meeting very often, and I think that part of it is really nice. Companies like us, startups, wouldn't have access to these people, so I think that's going to really help us make progress.
And Roby?
So to keep you on time, Houston, and without adding any extra, don't forget the electromagnetic spectrum.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, listen, thanks so much, everyone. We certainly appreciate your time and attention, and by all means, we'll be around if you have any questions, so thank you very much.